My brother convinced our whole family I was stealing from Grandma's account, until the bank cameras proved who the real thief was. I should have known something was wrong when my brother started being nice to me. For 23 years, Hayden had made my life miserable. He was the golden child, star athlete, honor roll student, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the screw-up who dropped out of college and moved back home to help care for Grandma Delilah after her stroke. Grandma was 91 and sharp as ever, but her mobility was limited. I'd moved into her guest room to help with daily tasks, grocery shopping, doctor appointments, managing her medications. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. wanting coffee and would forget she'd already asked me 3 times. Some days she'd insist on wearing her church dress to physical therapy. Other days she'd refuse to eat anything except vanilla wafers. But I loved her fiercely, and she was the only family member who'd never made me feel like a disappointment. The guest room had become my sanctuary. Grandma had let me paint the walls sage green and hang my amateur photography on every surface. She'd bought me a small desk where I worked on freelance graphic design projects. Nothing glamorous, mostly social media posts for local businesses, but it was something. She never made me feel ashamed about my unconventional path. Success isn't about impressing other people, she'd tell me while we watched her afternoon soap operas. It's about being useful to the people who matter. Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Growing up, Hayden had perfected the art of making me look bad while appearing innocent. In elementary school, he'd break something and hide the evidence in my backpack. When Mom found it, he'd look shocked and suggest maybe I was acting out because I felt overshadowed by his achievements. The pattern continued through high school. Stolen homework, missing money, damaged property. Always with Hayden playing the concerned brother, worried about my troubling behavior. He was brilliant at gaslighting. He'd do something cruel, then convince everyone, including me, that I was overreacting or misremembering what happened. By the time I was a teenager, I'd started doubting my own perceptions of events. The only person who'd ever seen through his act was Grandma Delilah. That boy's got the devil's own tongue, she'd whisper to me during family gatherings. Smooth as silk, but twice as dangerous. You watch yourself around him. I'd dismissed her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman who played favorites. Now I realized she'd been trying to protect me all along. That's when the family meeting started. We need to talk about Mom's finances, Dad announced during Sunday dinner, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment I knew so well. Her account is missing significant amounts. My stomach dropped like I'd been punched. What do you mean missing? Mom pulled out bank statements, her face grim and accusatory. $3,000 in the past 2 months, unauthorized withdrawals, large amounts taken out almost daily. The papers scattered across the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. Each transaction highlighted in yellow marker, each withdrawal circled in red ink. The dates and times were written in Mom's precise handwriting along the margins. Hayden leaned forward, his expression perfectly concerned, like he'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Who has access to her account besides Grandma? All eyes turned to me. The weight of their stares felt crushing. Just me and Grandma, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. And obviously Mom's not taking her own money, Hayden said with fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. She can barely remember what day it is. This is really hard for all of us, but we have to face facts. Dad's voice was ice cold, the same tone he'd used when I'd crashed his car at 17. We trusted you. We let you live there rent-free, gave you responsibility, and this is how you repay us? I tried explaining that I only used her card for groceries and prescriptions, always with receipts that I kept in a shoebox by my bed. But the evidence seemed damning. The withdrawals were happening during times when I was supposedly the only one there, always from the ATM closest to her house, always in amounts just under $200 to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Maybe you have a gambling problem, Mom suggested gently, her voice dripping with false compassion. Or drugs. We can get you help. There's no shame in admitting you need treatment. I'm not stealing from Grandma, I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. Hayden put his hand on my shoulder, and I wanted to shrug it off violently. The first step is admitting you have a problem. We've all seen the signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior, the way you've been avoiding family gatherings. What late nights? What secretive behavior? I spent most evenings playing Scrabble with Grandma and watching game shows. The only family gatherings I'd missed were ones where Hayden would inevitably make some cutting remark about my life choices. But I could see the doubt spreading across their faces like poison. Every innocent explanation I offered seemed to make me look more guilty. The timing matches perfectly, Uncle Ross pointed out. He'd driven over specifically for this intervention, bringing his wife Penny, who kept shaking her head sadly. The withdrawals started right after you moved in. Because that's when I started helping her with errands, I protested. Of course there would be more activity on her account. $3,000 worth of activity? Aunt Penny asked. For an elderly woman who barely leaves the house? Hayden had prepared for this moment meticulously. He produced a folder containing what he called concerning patterns he'd noticed in my behavior over the past months. He'd documented times when I'd been evasive about my whereabouts, occasions when I'd seemed unusually interested in Grandma's financial affairs, and instances of what he termed defensive behavior when asked innocent questions. I didn't want to say anything before, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But last month, I saw her going through Grandma's purse when she thought no one was looking. This was a complete lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that I saw doubt flicker across Mom's face. I was looking for her reading glasses, I said desperately. She'd asked me to find them. At 2 in the morning? Hayden asked gently. When Grandma was asleep? Another lie, but a believable one. The family exchanged glances that said everything. Within a week, they'd moved Grandma to Sunset Manor assisted living facility across town. I wasn't consulted about the decision. I came home from a grocery run to find movers loading her furniture into a truck. Where's Grandma? I asked Mom, panic rising in my throat. "We've found her a nice place where she'll be safe," Mom replied without looking at me. "Professional caregivers who won't take advantage of her condition." The words hit like a slap. I was banned from visiting without supervision. They changed her bank account and removed my name completely. The family WhatsApp group buzzed constantly with messages about my betrayal, my addiction, my desperate need for intervention. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to were suddenly experts on my supposed gambling problem. Cousin Miranda sent a long message about how addiction runs in families, and how she'd always worried about my unstable lifestyle. Uncle Ross shared articles about financial elder abuse. Even my teenage cousin posted on Instagram about being disappointed in family members who take advantage of vulnerable people. The social media aspect was particularly brutal. Family friends started treating me differently at the grocery store. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. Hayden had somehow managed to spread the story through our entire social circle without appearing to gossip. He'd simply shared his concerns about my well-being with a few key people, knowing the information would spread like wildfire. I felt completely isolated, like I was drowning in quicksand. Even Grandma seemed to doubt me. "I don't understand," she said during one supervised visit, her cloudy eyes searching my face. "I thought I could trust you. I defended you to everyone. But the evidence, it's so clear." Her voice broke when she said it. This woman who'd raised me during summers, who'd taught me to make her famous apple pie, who'd been my biggest supporter through every failure. She was looking at me like I was a stranger. The supervised visits were humiliating. A nurse would sit in the corner, taking notes on everything we discussed. I couldn't even hug my grandmother without feeling like I was being evaluated for signs of manipulation or coercion. The worst part was watching Hayden comfort everyone. He organized family meetings, researched treatment centers, and spoke eloquently about addiction being a disease that required professional help. He was the perfect concerned brother, stepping up when his family needed him most. "I've been reading about this," he told a room full of relatives during one of his impromptu support groups. "Financial addiction often starts small, borrowing a little here and there, thinking you'll pay it back. But it escalates quickly, especially when someone has access to vulnerable family members." He'd brought printouts from psychology websites and addiction treatment centers. He spoke with authority about intervention techniques and rehabilitation programs. Everyone hung on his every word. "The important thing is that we get help before this destroys our family permanently," he continued. "I know it's painful, but we have to think about protecting Mom first." He'd even created a timeline of my supposed descent into addiction, complete with dates and incidents that painted a picture of progressive moral deterioration. Most of the incidents were fabricated or grossly distorted, but they formed a compelling narrative that explained away any doubts family members might have had. During one particularly painful family meeting, he presented what he called intervention research. He'd contacted 3 different residential treatment facilities and gotten quotes for long-term care. He'd researched my legal options and spoken to a lawyer about conservatorship procedures. "I know this is expensive," he said, his voice choking with emotion, "but I'm willing to contribute significantly to the cost. We can't put a price on family." The manipulation was breathtaking. He was positioning himself as the sacrificial hero while painting me as the villain who'd torn the family apart. That's when I decided to prove my innocence. I spent 3 days at the bank, armed with printed transaction records and a desperate determination to clear my name. The first 2 managers brushed me off. Family disputes weren't their problem. But the third, an older woman named Patricia, actually listened. "You're saying someone else made these withdrawals using your grandmother's card?" she asked, studying my face carefully. "It's the only explanation. I never took that money. I can prove I was nowhere near that ATM on most of these dates." Patricia studied the records with the attention of someone who'd seen similar cases before. "These are all from the same ATM. Do you know our cameras keep footage for 90 days? My heart raced. "Can we check?" Normally we'd need a police report, but she glanced around and lowered her voice. "My own daughter went through something similar. Family members stealing and blaming her. Let me see what I can do." Patricia disappeared for 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was serious. "I can show you the footage, but if we find evidence of fraud, I'll have to file a report with our security department." "Please," I said. "I just want the truth." An hour later, Patricia called me into a small office with a computer screen. The room smelled like stale coffee and had motivational posters about customer service covering the walls. "These are the timestamps for the disputed transactions," she said, pulling up grainy security footage. "Let's start with the first one." The first video showed the ATM on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched the timestamp crawl forward until 2:47 p.m., the exact time of a $400 withdrawal. A figure approached the machine wearing a dark baseball cap and sunglasses, inserted a card, and made the transaction. It wasn't me. It was Hayden. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the desk. Patricia switched to the next transaction. Thursday morning, 11:23 a.m. There he was again, wearing different clothes but clearly recognizable. His distinctive walk, the way he held his shoulders, the expensive watch he always wore, it was unmistakably my brother. Video after video showed the same thing. Hayden, using what had to be a duplicate of Grandma's card, systematically draining her account. He'd been smart about it, varying his clothing, approaching from different angles, keeping his face partially hidden, but he couldn't disguise his build or his mannerisms. "How did he get a duplicate card?" I asked, my voice hollow. Patricia's expression was grim. "He'd need her personal information and PIN. Does he have access to those?" The pieces fell into place like a horrifying jigsaw puzzle. Hayden had helped set up Grandma's online banking last year. He'd insisted on writing down her PIN for emergencies. He'd been the one suggesting she keep her card in the kitchen drawer instead of her purse because it was safer. He'd He'd volunteered to help her with technology, installing banking apps on her phone that saved her login information. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I need copies of everything, I said, my voice stronger now. Patricia nodded grimly. I'll also file a fraud report with our security department. This is identity theft and elder abuse. We take this very seriously. She burned the videos onto a disk and printed timestamps for each transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. 17 separate instances of fraud, all clearly showing Hayden's face. Patricia also provided me with additional documentation I hadn't known existed. The bank's fraud detection software had actually flagged several of the transactions as suspicious due to their timing and location patterns. However, since the transactions were under the daily limit and the account holder hadn't reported them, no action had been taken. Your brother was very careful about staying under our automatic fraud triggers, Patricia explained. But the pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Armed with video evidence and fraud documentation, I drove straight to the police station. My hands were still shaking as I walked through the doors, carrying the folder that would either vindicate me or destroy my family forever. The detective, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Morrison, initially seemed skeptical. His desk was covered with case files and empty coffee cups, and he looked like he'd seen every family drama imaginable. Family disputes usually work themselves out, he said without looking up from his computer. Maybe try mediation first. This isn't a dispute, it's theft. I slid the video screenshots across his desk. My brother stole $3,000 from our 91-year-old grandmother and framed me for it. The detective's demeanor changed completely as he reviewed the evidence. He called over another officer, Sergeant Williams, and they spent 20 minutes going through every piece of documentation. This is pretty clear-cut, Morrison said finally. Elder financial abuse, identity theft, fraud. How long has this been going on? The bank says 2 months, but now I'm wondering if it started earlier. He's had access to her information for over a year. Sergeant Williams pulled up Hayden's background information on their computer system. No prior arrests, but let's see what else we can find. They discovered that Hayden had recently applied for several credit cards using Grandma's address. He'd also changed the mailing address for her Social Security payments to a P.O. box he'd rented under a false name. Within an hour, Morrison had opened a formal investigation. They would need to interview all parties and examine Grandma's complete financial records, going back 18 months. We'll need to interview all parties, he said. Don't alert your brother yet. We want to get his initial statement first. The investigation expanded quickly. Detective Morrison contacted the Postal Service about the address changes and discovered Hayden had been intercepting Grandma's mail for months. He'd redirected her Medicare statements, tax documents, and bank correspondence to his P.O. box. They also found evidence that he'd been using her personal information to research reverse mortgage options and life insurance policies. He'd called several financial companies posing as her grandson, helping with estate planning. The scope of his deception was staggering. The next part was the hardest. Waiting. For 3 days, I said nothing while the police built their case. I watched Hayden continue his concerned brother act, organizing another family intervention for my supposed gambling addiction. We found a really good residential treatment program, he told our parents over dinner. It's expensive, but we can't put a price on family. I'm willing to help with the costs. The irony was sickening. He was volunteering to pay for my treatment with money he'd stolen from our grandmother. He'd even prepared a speech about how addiction had taken me away from the person I used to be, how he'd noticed changes in my behavior months ago but hadn't wanted to believe it, how the family needed to come together to support me through recovery. I blame myself, he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. I should have intervened sooner. I should have seen the signs. During one of these performances, he produced a journal he claimed to have been keeping about my concerning behaviors. The entries were dated going back 6 months and described instances of me being secretive about finances, defensive when questioned, and evasive about my daily activities. The journal was entirely fabricated, but it was written in Hayden's careful handwriting and looked authentic. He'd even smudged some entries to make them look older. I started documenting things because I was worried about bringing accusations without proof, he explained to our parents. But the pattern became undeniable. Mom cried. Dad put his arm around Hayden and praised him for his maturity and compassion. I sat there in silence, knowing that in a few days their entire perception of reality would shatter. The family had started treating me like a dangerous addict. They spoke to me in careful, measured tones, avoided mentioning money in my presence, and watched my movements constantly. Uncle Ross had even suggested they stage a formal intervention with a professional counselor. We need to be prepared for denial and anger, Hayden told them, referencing pamphlets he'd collected from addiction treatment centers. The disease makes people manipulative and dishonest. On Friday, Detective Morrison called. We're ready to make an arrest. Can you gather your family for a meeting? I'd like to present our findings to everyone at once. I called Dad and suggested a family meeting at Grandma's old house. The assisted living facility had let us keep it for another month while they sorted out her belongings. I want to show you all something important, I said, about the missing money. They arrived expecting another confession, another plea for help. Hayden had brought brochures for treatment centers and a folder of research about addiction recovery. He'd prepared another speech about forgiveness and healing. Instead, they found Detective Morrison waiting in the living room with a laptop and a folder full of evidence. What's going on? Hayden asked, but I could see fear flicker behind his eyes for just a moment before the concerned mask slipped back into place. We've completed our investigation into the missing funds from Mrs. Delilah's account, the detective announced. And we've identified the perpetrator. He opened his laptop and showed the bank footage. The first video played, Hayden at the ATM clear as day. The room erupted. That's impossible, Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad just stared at the screen in shock. his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and horror. Hayden's face went white, but he tried to maintain his composure. This is some kind of mistake. That's not me. The video quality is terrible. That could be anyone. We have 17 different instances, Detective Morrison continued, playing video after video, all showing the defendant using a duplicated bank card to steal from his grandmother's account. The detective had edited together a compilation that made the evidence undeniable. Different dates, different clothing, but always the same person, always Hayden. Furthermore, Morrison continued, we've discovered that Mr. Rivers has been intercepting his grandmother's mail, redirecting her financial statements, and using her personal information to apply for credit cards and research financial products. He spread out photocopies of credit card applications, postal service change of address forms, and phone records showing calls to various financial institutions. You're lying, Hayden shouted, his careful facade finally cracking. He lunged toward the laptop as if he could somehow delete the evidence. Two officers who'd been waiting outside stepped into the room. Hayden Rivers, you're under arrest for elder financial abuse, identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they read him his rights, Hayden's mask slipped completely. He looked directly at me with pure, undiluted hatred. You did this, he snarled. You turned them against me. You've always been jealous, always trying to destroy what I built. No, I said calmly, my voice steadier than I felt. You did this when you decided to steal from our grandmother and frame me for it. But he wasn't done. As the officers cuffed him, he continued his rant. I was protecting her money from you. I was keeping it safe until she really needed it. You would have wasted it all on your pathetic little projects. At least I was going to put it to good use. The delusion was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, he was trying to paint himself as the hero. I was going to pay it all back with interest, he continued, his voice getting more desperate. I had investments lined up. This was just temporary borrowing. If you hadn't gone to the police like a vindictive little... That's enough, Detective Morrison interrupted. Save it for your lawyer. Mom was crying hysterically. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. After they took Hayden away, the room fell silent except for Mom's sobbing. I'm so sorry, Dad finally whispered, his voice barely audible. We should have believed you. We should have investigated before making accusations. How did he get her card information? Mom asked between sobs. I explained everything. How Hayden had volunteered to help with Grandma's banking, how he'd convinced her to write down her PIN, how he'd gradually gained access to all her financial information under the guise of helping her navigate technology. He's been planning this for over a year, I said. The only thing he didn't plan on was getting caught on camera. Detective Morrison had left copies of all the evidence. As we reviewed it together, the full scope of Hayden's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just stolen the money, he'd orchestrated the entire frame job. The timing of his accusations, his sudden concern for family finances, his push to move Grandma to assisted living. It was all designed to isolate me and make me look guilty while he continued stealing. He was going to let you take the blame for everything, Mom said, her voice hollow with realization. The detective's investigation had uncovered even more. Hayden had researched my daily routine, timing the withdrawals for when I was most likely to be at the house. He'd made sure the ATM was close enough to seem plausible, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally witness the transactions. He'd even planted small seeds of doubt about my character in family conversations for months before the accusations started. Casual comments about my irresponsible lifestyle, my financial struggles, my unpredictable behavior. He'd been setting the stage for my downfall long before the first dollar went missing. We drove to Sunset Manor to tell Grandma the truth. She was in the common room, staring out the window with the same lost expression she'd worn since moving there. When we explained what had really happened, she cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. I knew you wouldn't steal from me, she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength, but the evidence seemed so strong. I started to doubt my own judgment, my own memories. She'd been carrying guilt about doubting me, wondering if her stroke had affected her ability to read people's character. The relief in her eyes was heartbreaking. Can I come home now? She asked. The facility director, who'd overheard our conversation, was professional, but clearly shaken. We've seen cases like this before, she said quietly. Family members using placement as a way to gain control of assets. I'm sorry we didn't catch the red flags. 3 weeks later, Hayden pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his schemes. His lawyer had advised him that the evidence was overwhelming, and a jury would likely impose a harsher sentence after seeing the full extent of his manipulation. The investigation revealed he'd also been overcharging Grandma for home repairs and pocketing the difference. He'd convinced her to pay for a new roof that cost half what he'd claimed. He'd charged her for plumbing work that was never done. He'd even billed her for landscaping services and pocketed the money while doing the work himself. His entire relationship with our grandmother had been transactional, a long-term con designed to separate her from her money. The prosecution presented evidence that Hayden had been planning to have Grandma declared incompetent so he could gain power of attorney over her finances. He'd already consulted with lawyers about conservatorship procedures and had been documenting what he called her declining mental capacity. His plan was to gradually isolate her from family members who might question his actions, gain legal control of her assets, and then systematically drain her accounts while she was helpless to stop him. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The judge was particularly harsh in her criticism. Elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes, she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. You betrayed the trust of a vulnerable family member and attempted to destroy your sibling's reputation to cover your tracks. This court finds your actions particularly heinous because of the calculated nature of your deception. The judge also ordered him to undergo psychological evaluation and complete courses on elder abuse awareness. He was prohibited from having any contact with elderly family members without supervision upon his release. Hayden never looked at me during the proceedings. Even his lawyer seemed disgusted by the evidence. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about elder financial abuse in our community. Hayden's mugshot appeared alongside statistics about family members who steal from elderly relatives. The story mentioned that I had been falsely accused and vindicated by security footage. The public humiliation was devastating for someone who'd built his identity around being the perfect son and community member. After court, our family gathered at Grandma's house, the one she'd decided to move back to immediately after his arrest. "I'm not letting anyone scare me out of my own home again," she declared, settling back into her favorite armchair like she'd never left. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark presence had been lifted. Grandma immediately began redecorating, replacing items that reminded her of Hayden's help with new purchases that reflected her own preferences. Dad pulled me aside later that evening. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how wrong we were, how wrong I was. You believed the evidence," I said. "It looked convincing." "No," he shook his head, his eyes red with unshed tears. "We believed him because we wanted to, because it was easier than admitting our golden child was capable of something this evil. We took the easy path instead of asking hard questions." Dad had been particularly devastated by the revelation. He'd built his relationship with Hayden around pride in his son's achievements and moral character. Learning that it was all a facade had shattered his sense of reality. "I keep thinking about all the times he manipulated situations," Dad said. "All the times he made you look bad and I believed him without question. How many years of your life did I waste doubting you because of his lies?" Mom joined us, her eyes still swollen from crying. "Can you forgive us?" "We're family," I said. "We'll figure it out." But forgiveness didn't come immediately. It took months of family therapy, honest conversations, and rebuilt trust. Dad had to confront his favoritism. Mom had to acknowledge how her need to see the best in Hayden had blinded her to red flags. The hardest part was helping them understand that their golden child had never really existed. The Hayden they'd idolized was a carefully constructed facade designed to manipulate their emotions and extract maximum benefit. Family therapy sessions were brutal but necessary. Our counselor, Dr. Martinez, specialized in family trauma and manipulation dynamics. She helped us understand how Hayden had used classic manipulation techniques to control family narratives for years. Narcissistic family members often create what we call a golden child persona, Dr. Martinez explained. They present themselves as perfect while systematically undermining other family members to maintain their elevated status. She walked us through examples of Hayden's manipulation going back to our childhood. The broken vase blamed on me. The missing homework that mysteriously appeared in my backpack. The constant subtle undermining of my achievements while highlighting his own. The goal is to become the family's central figure, the one everyone turns to, trusts, and admires, she continued. This gives them enormous power to control information and manipulate situations. The therapy helped, but the damage ran deep. Mom struggled with guilt about the years she'd prioritized Hayden's needs over mine. Dad grappled with the realization that his favoritism had enabled Hayden's behavior and hurt me profoundly. I taught him that he could get away with anything as long as he presented it the right way, Dad admitted during one particularly difficult session. I rewarded his manipulation without realizing what I was doing. 6 months later, Grandma asked me to move back in with her, not as a caregiver, but as her roommate and business partner. She'd decided to start a small consulting business, helping other elderly people avoid financial scams. "Who better to help than someone who's seen it all?" she said with a grin. We printed business cards that read, "Delilah's Defense, Protecting Seniors from Financial Predators." She'd give presentations at community centers about warning signs of elder abuse. I'd handle the technology side, website, social media, online resources. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Hayden's attempt to destroy my life had actually led to something better than I'd ever imagined. Our first client was Mrs. Peterson from down the street. Her son had been slowly draining her checking account while promising to invest the money for her retirement. He'd convinced her to sign documents giving him access to her accounts, then systematically transferred money to his own investments. "I trusted him completely," Mrs. Peterson said, tears streaming down her face. "He's my only child. I never thought he'd steal from me." We helped her document the theft and contact authorities. The pattern was eerily similar to Hayden's scheme: gradual access to financial information, manipulation of trust, and systematic theft disguised as helpful financial management. Her son was arrested within a week. Word spread quickly through the senior community. We started getting calls from across the state. Elderly people who suspected family members of financial abuse, but didn't know how to prove it or where to turn for help. Grandma thrived in her new role as an advocate. Her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude made her incredibly effective at spotting scams and manipulative behavior. "I won't let what happened to me happen to anyone else," she'd tell our clients. "These predators count on us being too embarrassed or confused to fight back." Our second client was Mr. Richardson, whose daughter-in-law had been forging his signature on checks and withdrawing money from his savings account. She'd convinced him that he was becoming forgetful and needed her help managing his finances. "She'd show me bank statements that didn't match my records," he explained. "When I questioned the discrepancies, she'd say I was confused because of my age. Eventually, I started believing her. The psychological manipulation was as damaging as the financial theft. These predators didn't just steal money. They stole their victims' confidence in their own mental abilities. Our third case involved a grandmother whose grandson had convinced her to take out a reverse mortgage to help him start a business. He'd pocketed the money and disappeared, leaving her homeless and financially devastated. Each case we handled revealed new tactics that financial predators used against elderly family members. We began documenting these patterns and sharing information with law enforcement and social services. Within a year, we'd helped prosecute 12 cases of elder financial abuse. Our success rate caught the attention of the state attorney general's office, which invited us to participate in a task force on elder protection. Grandma became a minor celebrity in senior advocacy circles. She testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protections and appeared on local news programs to educate seniors about warning signs of financial exploitation. The best defense is education, she'd say during interviews. When seniors know what to look for, predators can't take advantage of them. Meanwhile, reports from prison indicated that Hayden was struggling with incarceration. He'd been placed in protective custody after other inmates learned about his crimes against an elderly family member. Apparently, even criminals have standards when it comes to elder abuse. His cellmate told prison officials that Hayden spent most of his time writing letters, not to family members but to lawyers and journalists, trying to convince them that he'd been wrongfully convicted. He claimed the bank videos were doctored and that I had somehow orchestrated an elaborate frame job. The delusion was complete. Even in prison, facing the consequences of his actions, he couldn't accept responsibility for what he'd done. Last week, I got a letter from Hayden in prison. It was 3 pages of self-pity and blame, how the family had driven him to steal, how I'd ruined his life by pressing charges, how everyone would see the truth eventually. He claimed he'd been planning to pay the money back once his investments matured. He said he'd only framed me to protect the family from embarrassment while he sorted out the financial situation. He insisted that if I'd just talked to him privately instead of involving the police, everything could have been resolved quietly. The letter was full of phrases like, "if you really cared about family," and "your vindictive nature has destroyed everything." Even from prison, he was still trying to manipulate the narrative. He wrote about how difficult prison was for someone falsely accused, and how the other inmates treated him poorly because they didn't understand the complex family dynamics that had led to his situation. "I'm surrounded by real criminals," he wrote. "People who actually intended to hurt others. I was trying to help the family even if my methods were unconventional." The letter ended with a request for money for commissary items and books, along with a veiled threat about what he might do when he was released if the family didn't support him during his incarceration. I threw it away without finishing it, but not before showing it to Dr. Martinez during our family therapy session. "Classic manipulation," she said after reading excerpts. "He's trying to maintain control even from prison. The threats, the guilt trips, the attempts to rewrite history, it's all textbook narcissistic behavior. Some people never learn, but the rest of us do. Mom and Dad visit regularly now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. They've had to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their parenting, but that honesty has brought us closer together." Uncle Ross and Aunt Penny publicly apologized for their accusations and donated money to our anti-fraud business. Cousin Miranda deleted her Instagram post and wrote a long apology message about jumping to conclusions. The family WhatsApp group now shares articles about financial literacy and elder protection instead of gossip and accusations. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that healing from family manipulation takes time. There are still moments when old patterns resurface, when Dad automatically takes Hayden's side before catching himself, or when Mom makes excuses for behavior that hurt me. But the difference now is awareness. We recognize these patterns and address them directly instead of pretending they don't exist. The local community has also been transformed by our experience. The Senior Center now offers monthly workshops on financial protection. The police department created a specialized elder abuse unit. Local banks implemented additional security measures for elderly customers. Our story became a case study in how financial predators operate within families and how communities can work together to protect vulnerable members. Grandma's advocacy work has expanded beyond individual cases. She now consults with banks, law enforcement agencies, and social service organizations about identifying and preventing elder financial abuse. "The predators are getting smarter," she tells audiences during her presentations. But so are we. Knowledge is our best weapon against these criminals. These days, when someone's story seems too convenient, when the evidence points a little too neatly in one direction, I remember those bank cameras. Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. And sometimes the person you trust most is the one you should watch most carefully. The business has grown beyond our wildest expectations. We now have 3 part-time employees and a waiting list of clients. We've helped recover over $200,000 in stolen funds and prevented countless additional thefts through education and early intervention. Grandma jokes that Hayden inadvertently gave her the best retirement career she could have imagined. "He thought he was destroying our lives," she says. "Instead, he gave us a purpose we never knew we needed." Last month, we received a commendation from the governor for our work in elder protection. Grandma insisted on accepting the award wearing the same dress she'd worn to Hayden's sentencing, a small act of defiance that made us both smile. The irony of the situation still amazes me. Hayden's attempt to manipulate and control our family ultimately led to his own downfall and created something beautiful from the wreckage of his deception. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the very tools predators use to harm others become the instruments of their own destruction. And sometimes the family member everyone thinks is the problem turns out to be the solution everyone needed. My ex told everyone I was crazy and unstable, so I let his new girlfriend discover the truth about him the hard way. When Marcus broke up with me after 3 years, he didn't just leave. He launched a full character assassination campaign that would make a seasoned political operative jealous. Suddenly, overnight, I transformed from his loving girlfriend into the psycho ex who couldn't handle rejection, the unstable one who made up wild, fabricated stories about his concerning behavior, the crazy girl who couldn't be trusted around sharp objects, social media, or mutual friends without supervision. Our entire social circle started avoiding me like I had contracted some sort of contagious mental illness that might spread through casual conversation. My coworkers began giving me weird, pitying looks after he visited my office to check on my mental state and subtly suggest to my boss that I might need professional help and possibly extended time off for psychiatric treatment. Even my elderly landlord called me one evening, his voice filled with genuine concern, asking if I needed resources for emotional support because a deeply concerned gentleman had reached out about my well-being and ability to maintain stable housing. The most infuriating part was how believable Marcus made it all sound. He had this way of tilting his head slightly when he spoke about me, his voice taking on this tone of sincere worry mixed with resignation, like he was a saint who had tried everything possible to help his troubled ex-girlfriend, but sadly, some people just couldn't be saved from their own destructive tendencies. Marcus was a master manipulator with the polished charm of a seasoned politician, and the calculating, strategic nature of a chess grandmaster planning moves 17 steps ahead. Successful, devastatingly handsome in that generic business magazine way, and convincingly sincere when he needed to be. He painted himself as the deeply concerned ex-boyfriend who just wanted his former girlfriend to get the professional help she desperately needed, while systematically destroying every relationship and support system I had built over the years. Looking back now, I can see how methodically he had isolated me during our relationship. It started small, casual comments about how my friends seemed jealous of our happiness, or how my family didn't really understand our connection. He'd suggest we skip social gatherings because he wanted to spend quality time together, just the two of us. He'd offer to pick me up from work so we could grab dinner, which meant I stopped getting drinks with colleagues. Slowly, gradually, my world became smaller until it revolved entirely around him. When I tried to rebuild those connections after our breakup, I discovered he had already laid the groundwork for my isolation. He'd been having concerned conversations with my friends for months, subtly planting seeds about my emotional instability and concerning behavior. He told them I'd been struggling with anxiety and depression, that I sometimes lashed out irrationally, that he was worried about my mental health but didn't know how to help. My best friend, Sarah, was the first to reveal the extent of his manipulation. 3 weeks after our breakup, she finally admitted that Marcus had been calling her regularly, expressing worry about my increasing paranoia and asking if she'd noticed any alarming changes in my behavior. He'd even suggested that my accusations about his controlling tendencies were a symptom of my deteriorating mental state. I thought he was just being caring, Sarah said, her voice thick with guilt. He seemed so genuinely worried about you, and you had been more withdrawn lately. Of course I had been withdrawn. Marcus had been systematically undermining my confidence and isolating me from everyone I cared about. But he was skilled enough to make it look like natural relationship evolution, and smart enough to start building his alternative narrative before I even realized what was happening. He told everyone I'd become obsessed with him after our breakup, that I'd been sending him threatening messages at all hours of the night, showing up at his workplace unannounced, and spreading malicious lies about their relationship because I couldn't accept that he'd moved on to someone better. None of it was true, but Marcus had always been extraordinarily persuasive, and people naturally wanted to believe the successful, charming businessman over the allegedly unstable woman. The genius of his approach was how he never directly said I was lying or crazy. Instead, he'd furrow his brow with concern and say things like, "I'm really worried about Emma. She's been struggling since our breakup, and I think she might be having trouble distinguishing between her feelings and reality right now." It sounded so much more credible than calling me a liar outright. 2 months after our breakup, just as I was starting to rebuild my social connections and regain some semblance of emotional equilibrium, he was dating Sophia, a sweet, naive marketing coordinator from his company, 24 years old, fresh out of college with stars in her eyes, and that particular combination of ambition and insecurity that made her perfect prey for someone like Marcus. She was everything I had been 3 years earlier: young, impressionable, eager to please, and completely unprepared for the sophisticated manipulation techniques of a man who had been perfecting his craft for years. She had long blonde hair that she wore in a sleek ponytail, bright blue eyes that lit up whenever she talked about her future, and the kind of optimistic outlook that comes from never having experienced real betrayal. I watched from a careful distance as he love-bombed her exactly the way he'd done with me in the beginning. The expensive flowers delivered to her office with romantic notes that made her colleagues swoon with envy. Surprise vacation bookings to exclusive resorts in Napa Valley and Big Sur. Public declarations of love on social media with carefully curated photos that made their relationship look like a fairy tale. The whole nauseating performance that I'd fallen for completely 3 years earlier when I was young and stupid enough to believe it was genuine affection rather than calculated manipulation. Marcus had a formula, and he followed it religiously. First came the overwhelming attention and affection, what psychologists call love bombing. He'd text constantly throughout the day, send flowers for no reason, plan elaborate surprise dates, and make grand romantic gestures that felt like something out of a movie. He'd tell you that you were different from every other woman he'd ever met, that he'd never felt a connection like this before, that he could see a future together. Then came the gradual isolation. He'd express concern about friends who seemed negative or unsupportive of your relationship. He'd suggest spending weekends together instead of going out with your usual social group. He'd offer to drive you places so you wouldn't have to take public transportation or ask friends for rides. Slowly, your world would shrink until he was at the center of everything. The control came next, disguised as care and concern. He'd want to know where you were going, who you'd be with, what time you'd be home. He'd call it wanting to make sure you were safe, or missing you so much he couldn't bear not knowing when he'd see you again. He'd frame possessiveness as devotion and jealousy as proof of how much he loved you. Finally came the psychological manipulation. He'd undermine your confidence with subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. He'd gaslight you when you questioned his behavior, making you feel like you were being irrational or overly sensitive. He'd collect information about your insecurities and vulnerabilities, then use them against you whenever you tried to assert independence. I had lived through the entire cycle, and now I was watching him restart it with fresh prey. When Sophia started following me on Instagram, I knew Marcus had told her about his problematic ex-girlfriend. Her direct message confirmed everything I'd suspected about the narrative he was spinning. Hey, I hope this isn't weird, but Marcus mentioned you might need someone to talk to. I've been through toxic relationships too, and I know how hard it can be to move on and heal from emotional trauma. If you ever want to grab coffee and chat about moving forward in a healthy way, I'm here. The message was so perfectly crafted to make me seem pathetic and broken that I had to admire Marcus's skill. He'd positioned himself as the concerned ex who cared enough to ask his new girlfriend to reach out to his troubled former partner. It made him look compassionate and mature while painting me as someone who needed intervention from strangers. But it also gave me the opening I'd been waiting for. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I crafted my response carefully, striking just the right tone of grateful vulnerability, mixed with lingering affection for Marcus. I suggested we meet at the small coffee shop 3 blocks from Marcus's apartment, the same place he'd taken me for our first official date 3 years ago, back when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Sophia arrived 15 minutes early, looking nervous but determined to help the poor, unstable woman her wonderful boyfriend was so concerned about. She wore a soft pink sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in that same sleek ponytail, and she kept checking her phone like she was expecting Marcus to text her encouragement for this charitable mission. Marcus really cares about you, she said earnestly after we'd ordered our drinks, stirring her vanilla latte with the intensity of someone trying to solve world hunger. He talks about you sometimes when he's feeling reflective. He's genuinely worried you're not getting the professional help you need to process the breakup in a healthy way and move forward with your life. I smiled sadly, channeling every acting class I'd ever taken in college and drawing on genuine emotions from the darkest period of my life. He's always been so thoughtful about other people's well-being, such a caring soul. It's one of the things I loved most about him. Tell me, has he given you a key to his place yet? Her face lit up like Christmas morning, and I could see the pride and excitement she felt at reaching this relationship milestone. Actually, yes. Just last week. It felt like such a huge step forward in our relationship. He said he'd never given anyone a key that quickly before, but he trusts me completely and wants me to feel like his home is my home too. That's wonderful, Sophia. I'm so happy for you both. You seem like such a sweet person, and Marcus deserves someone who appreciates him. I'm sure he told you about his home security system? The cameras? She looked confused, her smile faltering slightly as uncertainty crept into her expression. Cameras? What cameras? He never mentioned any kind of security system. Oh, I paused, looking genuinely concerned and slightly uncomfortable, like I'd accidentally revealed something I shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. I don't want to cause problems between you two, especially when you're so happy together and building something beautiful. What cameras? She pressed, leaning forward with growing anxiety and setting down her latte with a slightly trembling hand. I pulled out my phone with apparent reluctance, opening a carefully organized folder I'd never shown anyone else. The screenshots were damning, but I presented them like someone sharing painful evidence rather than springing a trap. Marcus likes to document things. For his protection, he always said. He told me it was because he'd had problems with previous girlfriends making false accusations after breakups, and he wanted to protect himself legally. Her eyes widened as she saw the screenshots I'd taken during our relationship. Timestamps from hidden cameras positioned throughout his apartment, running 24 hours a day. Bedroom, bathroom, living room, kitchen, even the hallway. All recording continuously without the knowledge or consent of anyone who entered his space. This can't be real, she whispered, her hands starting to shake as the implications began to sink in. I found them during our second year together. Tiny cameras hidden everywhere you could imagine. When I confronted him about it, he said I was being paranoid and irrational, that I was imagining things and making up stories because I was jealous and insecure about his past relationships. He made me feel like I was losing my mind. I showed her more evidence. Photos of the microscopic cameras hidden in picture frames, air fresheners, decorative objects, even the smoke detector above his bed, all purchased under Marcus's credit cards, which I'd meticulously documented before he made me return his spare card and accused me of potential financial misconduct. He's been recording you since day one, I said gently, watching her face go pale as understanding dawned. Check your key ring carefully. Is there a small black device attached that you thought was just decorative? Sophia fumbled with her keys with trembling fingers, her face going ashen as she found the tiny recording device attached to her keychain, disguised as a cute little charm he'd given her during their second week of dating, telling her it was a symbol of how much she meant to him. Oh my God, she breathed, staring at the device like it might explode in her hands. There's more, I continued carefully, watching her emotional state and moderating my revelations accordingly. Has he asked you a lot of personal questions about your past relationships? Your family problems? Things you're ashamed of or embarrassed about? She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes like a horrible sunrise. He keeps detailed files on everyone, comprehensive notes about vulnerabilities, fears, emotional triggers, things he can use for leverage later if needed. When I tried to leave him the first time, he threatened to tell my boss about my father's gambling addiction and my family's financial problems, intimate details I'd shared with him in confidence during vulnerable moments. I showed her pictures I'd secretly taken of the filing cabinet in his home office during one of the few times he'd left me alone in his apartment. Folders meticulously labeled with women's names, including mine and several others I didn't recognize. Each folder was thick with handwritten notes, printed emails, screenshots of private conversations, and personal information that could only have been gathered through systematic surveillance and manipulation. He's done this before, I said quietly, letting the weight of that statement settle. I wasn't his first victim, and you won't be his last. There's a whole system to how he operates, refined over years of practice. Sophia was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of his manipulation and violation became clear. I told all my friends you were making up stories about him. I defended him to my family when they said he seemed controlling and possessive. I called you crazy behind your back and felt sorry for him for having to deal with a psychotic ex-girlfriend. It's not your fault, I said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. He's a professional at this. He's had years to perfect his technique, and he's incredibly good at making his victims feel complicit in their own manipulation. The coffee shop was getting busier around us, but our conversation existed in its own bubble of horror and revelation. I could see Sophia processing everything, connecting dots that had been invisible to her just an hour earlier. We need to document everything, she said suddenly, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders. If he's doing this to me and he did it to you, he's probably doing it to other women too. Do you have access to his laptop? I asked. She nodded grimly. He gave me the password last week, said he wanted complete transparency between us and that trust was the foundation of any healthy relationship. We drove to Marcus's apartment in her car, my stomach churning with familiar anxiety as we approached the building that had once felt like home, but now represented 3 years of systematic violation and control. He was at his monthly golf game, a standing appointment every Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. with his business associates, during which he networked and conducted informal business while maintaining his image as a successful, well-connected professional. I knew his schedule better than my own after 3 years of planning my life around his routines and availability. Saturday golf, Wednesday evening squash league, Friday drinks with colleagues, Sunday morning gym sessions. He was predictable in his self-care and social obligations, which made planning this intervention much easier. Using Sophia's key, we entered the apartment that had once been my second home. Everything looked exactly the same. The expensive furniture we'd picked out together during weekend shopping trips, the artwork I'd helped him choose from local galleries, the kitchen where I'd cooked elaborate dinners for his friends and business associates. But now Sophia could see what I'd tried desperately to tell people for months. The cameras were everywhere, and once you knew what to look for, they were impossible to miss. Sophia found his laptop on the desk in his home office, while I located the external hard drives hidden behind books on his shelf. Terabytes of storage containing years of recordings, meticulously organized by date and woman's name. The violation was staggering in its scope and calculation. Jesus Christ, Sophia whispered, staring at the laptop screen with a mixture of horror and fascination. There are hundreds of videos of me sleeping, showering, changing clothes, having private phone conversations with my family. He's been watching everything. Check the folder labeled insurance, I suggested, my own stomach turning as memories of my own discovery flooded back. She clicked, and we found audio recordings of private conversations spanning months. Sophia crying to him about her mother's mental health issues and her fears of inherited depression. Me discussing my anxieties about job security and my father's drinking problem. Other women sharing intimate details of childhood trauma, sexual assault, and family dysfunction. Each recording was labeled with clinical precision, dates, times, emotional states, vulnerabilities revealed. It was like a psychological dossier designed to weaponize our most private moments against us. He's been building blackmail material on all of us, I said, feeling sick all over again. Emotional leverage to use if we ever tried to leave or expose him. Sophia was crying harder now, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. I told all my friends you were making up stories about him. I defended him to my family when they said something seemed off about our relationship. I called you a psychotic ex-girlfriend behind your back and felt sorry for him for having to deal with your alleged harassment. Please don't blame yourself, I said firmly. This is exactly what he does. He turns his victims into accomplices by making them participate in discrediting previous victims. It's part of his system. We methodically copied everything onto multiple secure drives, working in tense silence as we documented years of systematic violation. But I had one more revelation that would ensure Marcus never manipulated another woman again. Sophia, I need to show you something else, but it's going to be really difficult to see. Check his browser history under private browsing. She navigated to his supposedly deleted browsing data, which wasn't actually deleted, just hidden in a folder innocuously marked Tax Documents 2019-2023. What we found made both of us physically ill. Marcus wasn't just recording women without consent for his own gratification or control. He was selling the content on private forums and specialized websites. Hundreds of videos of intimate moments, labeled with our real names, ages, physical descriptions, and personal information. Shower videos, bedroom footage, private conversations, all packaged and sold to strangers on the internet for profit. He's been profiting off our privacy, I said, feeling nauseated even though I'd suspected this for months after noticing unexplained income deposits in bank statements he'd carelessly left visible. We've been his product this entire time. The financial records showed thousands of dollars in payments from various adult websites and private collectors who specialized in voyeuristic content. He'd been running a sophisticated exploitation operation, using his charm and manipulation skills to recruit unwitting victims who became content producers without their knowledge or consent. Sophia stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair and causing the laptop to slide dangerously close to the edge of the desk. I'm calling the police right now. This is criminal. This is— Wait, I said, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. Let's be strategic about this. We need to document everything properly first, or he'll find a way to destroy the evidence and discredit us both. Over the next 3 hours, we systematically photographed and copied every piece of evidence we could find. Screenshots of his video collections, financial records showing his profits from selling our private content, email correspondence with buyers and website administrators, and detailed spreadsheets tracking his victims and earnings. But the most damning evidence was his personal database. A comprehensive spreadsheet tracking which women had discovered his behavior and how he'd successfully discredited them. My name was at the top of the neutralized threats list, with detailed notes about his successful character assassination campaign and reputation destruction protocol. The notes were chillingly clinical. Subject responded to isolation tactics as expected. Social network successfully poisoned against her. Reputation damage sufficient to prevent credible accusations. No further action required. Other women were listed under active management, including Sophia, with specific strategies for keeping them compliant, isolated from support systems, and emotionally dependent. Sophia's entry included notes about her insecurities regarding her mother's mental health and her desperate desire to prove she could maintain a stable relationship. There were also women listed under future targets, with notes about their vulnerabilities and the best approaches for recruitment. Some I recognized from his workplace and social circles. Young, attractive women in subordinate positions who would be flattered by attention from a successful older man. We copied everything and left the apartment before Marcus returned from golf, making sure to reset everything exactly as we'd found it, so he wouldn't suspect what we'd discovered. That Monday morning, Sophia and I walked into the police station together, armed with multiple flash drives full of evidence and a detailed timeline of Marcus's criminal behavior spanning several years. We filed reports for voyeurism, invasion of privacy, distribution of intimate images without consent, stalking, and computer fraud. The detective assigned to our case was Detective Maria Gonzalez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who'd clearly seen this type of case before and understood the complexity of proving systematic psychological manipulation. How many other victims do you think there are? She asked, reviewing our evidence with an increasingly grim expression. At least 12 based on his files, I replied, but probably more who haven't been cataloged yet or who managed to escape before he added them to his database. Detective Gonzalez nodded grimly. We'll need to contact every woman mentioned in his records. This is going to be a complex case that might take months to fully investigate. Within a week, investigators had contacted every woman mentioned in Marcus's files. 8 others came forward with similar stories of manipulation, secret recording, and systematic discrediting when they tried to speak out or end their relationships. The pattern was always the same: intensive love bombing followed by gradual isolation from support systems, collection of compromising material and personal vulnerabilities, increasing control and psychological manipulation, and vicious retaliation against anyone who tried to leave or expose him. Marcus was arrested at his office on a Thursday morning, led away in handcuffs in front of his colleagues and clients. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the prominent businessman charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and exploitation. His company immediately suspended him pending investigation, and several business deals fell through as partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Local news picked up the story after court documents became public, and suddenly the narrative shifted completely. Everyone who had believed his lies about me was calling to apologize, but the damage to my career and relationships had already been done. Some trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. The best part was watching Marcus try to rebuild his image while facing multiple felony charges. His expensive lawyer held press conferences claiming his client was the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the number of victims made conspiracy claims increasingly absurd. His lawyer initially suggested a plea deal, admission of guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and avoiding the publicity of a trial. Marcus refused indignantly, convinced he could charm his way out of consequences like he always had. His narcissism wouldn't allow him to admit wrongdoing or accept that his victims had outsmarted him. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was covered extensively by local media. 12 women testified about his pattern of manipulation, recording, and retaliation. The evidence was overwhelming. Hours of video footage, detailed financial records, comprehensive documentation of his methods and victims. Marcus's defense strategy was to claim all relationships were consensual, and that recording in his own home was legal. His lawyer tried to paint us as bitter ex-girlfriends seeking revenge and attention, suggesting we had conspired together to frame an innocent man. But the evidence of secret recording, financial exploitation, and systematic manipulation was impossible to explain away. The prosecutor methodically presented Marcus's own documentation of his crimes, his spreadsheets tracking victims, his financial records showing profits from exploitation, his detailed notes about manipulation strategies. It was like he had provided a comprehensive instruction manual for prosecuting himself. Marcus was convicted on 14 counts of voyeurism, 3 counts of distribution of intimate images without consent, 2 counts of stalking, and 1 count of computer fraud. He received 8 years in prison and was required to register as a sex offender upon release. His civil cases are still ongoing. 9 women, including me, filed lawsuits for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and lost wages due to his retaliation campaign. Our lawyer says the settlements will likely reach 7 figures total, especially since Marcus had been profiting from our exploitation and had significant assets to liquidate. More importantly, Marcus can never do this to another woman again. The conviction ensures he'll be monitored after release, his reputation is permanently destroyed, and any future romantic partners can easily discover his history through sex offender registries. Sophia and I became unlikely friends through this process. She quit her job and moved across the country for a fresh start, but we stay in touch regularly. The experience bonded us in a way that transcended the awful circumstances of how we met. She's in therapy working through the trauma, but she's stronger than she gives herself credit for. Last month, she sent me a photo from her new apartment with her boyfriend, a genuinely kind man who asked permission before posting a couple photo on social media and respects her boundaries completely. He thinks I'm wonderful exactly as I am, she texted. No documentation required. The criminal justice system doesn't always work for women like us. Too often, charismatic manipulators escape consequences while their victims are discredited and silenced. But sometimes when we support each other instead of competing, we can expose the truth and protect future victims. Marcus spent 3 years convincing people I was crazy and unstable. He nearly destroyed my career, my relationships, and my mental health with his calculated lies and systematic manipulation. Now he's the one behind bars, and I'm thriving in ways I never thought possible. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes it just needs the right person to help dig it up. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone else discover what you already knew. The most satisfying part wasn't seeing Marcus get arrested or convicted. It was watching Sophia transform from a naive victim into a fierce advocate for other women. She now volunteers with organizations that help survivors of intimate partner surveillance and speaks publicly about recognizing manipulation tactics. We turned our victimization into power, and that's something Marcus can never take away from us.